Hi, Smarter News. We get so much data thrown at us on a regular basis. I thought let's just pick one data point per top story to explain what's going on and why it matters. It's our sampling of SmartHER Starters to start the week. Small bites, high quality. First, to the traffic jam that's really impacting the entire planet, and that's at the Suez Canal. It is a man-made waterway that's linking Asia and the Middle East to Europe. If you didn't have this man-made waterway, you'd have to sail around the continent of Africa. And as you know, time is money, so the canal saves people time. It also saves people money, except when there's a huge cargo ship that's blocking the canal, making it not possible for any other ships to get through. How much is this traffic jam costing us in global trade? Estimates say $400 million per hour, or more than $9 billion per day. So a lot of money. What goes through the canal? Anything you can imagine: household goods, live animals, crude oil, all of it. But you have about more than 300 ships backed up, kind of wondering what's going to happen and whether or not they're going to get this ship moved. In the meantime, a side effect of all of this is cargo containers. Separately, there's an issue of having enough cargo containers to ship goods all around the world as demand is coming back from this pandemic. So you have hundreds of ships backed up with cargo containers that are out of circulation, impacting other trade in other parts of the world that need cargo containers to ship their goods. This is a really big story. The ship has been stuck almost a week, and so far, there's no solution. Guess what? We're getting some reports that the ship may have been moved just a little bit. And if that's the case, that's good news. If by the time you see this video, the ship is freed, that would be even better news. Regardless, this is an important part of the world to know about, and it will take some time to recover from this incident. So still a developing story to watch. Next, let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. And the data point to know is that we're seeing a rise in COVID-19 infections in more than 30 states. Why is that? Well, doctors don't really know for sure. They think it is because of loosening of restrictions and maybe variants that are becoming stronger in these areas. But what's really important to note, in these more than 30 states, they're all over. They're red states, blue states, tight restrictions, loose restrictions. There's particular areas that do come up in my research, including the Midwest and the Northeast. New York and New Jersey is mentioned a lot. These were the hot spots last year at this time. So speaking of restrictions, France has had restrictions in place for weeks and weeks, including a curfew. So not an all-out lockdown, but a curfew to try to curb transmission. And yet a group of doctors in the Paris area just wrote an open letter saying that they're concerned about rising rates of infections and having enough hospital capacity. So why are we paying close attention to Europe? It's Europe we were watching last year at this time that sort of foreshadowed what we saw here in the United States. Meantime, back here at home, one of the things we're seeing a trend is more states open up vaccinations to any adult of any age. So Texas, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Kansas, Louisiana, a bunch of states this week are going to start doing that to try to up the amount of vaccinations that are actually distributing. In the meantime, New York State is doing something very interesting. They have something called a digital vaccine pass. It's almost like a boarding pass on your phone, and what it'll show is a negative COVID test or your vaccination records. Now, controversial, first of its kind. How it's actually going to be used practically is a big question mark. Right now, it's voluntary, but something to keep an eye on. Next to the U.S. southern border, and we've seen Democrats and Republican lawmakers take their own trips over the last several days to the U.S. southern border to see conditions there. This is why you might be seeing photos or videos of these trips circulating on social media. The data point you should know is 16,000. 16,000 is the number of minors, those 17 and younger, believed to be in government custody this month alone. That comes to more than 500 per day. And just to put that in context, if that is the final number by the end of this month, that would be the highest number we've seen since at least 2010. So what's happening at the U.S. southern border right now is historic. Why is it happening? That's a big question, and one that's heavily debated. Some blame the Biden administration, saying policies that allow these minors to stay in America only encourages risky behavior and bolsters human trafficking operations. The Biden administration denies it, says their policies have nothing to do with it. In the meantime, both Democrats and Republicans have criticized the Biden administration on this issue for different reasons. So the question remains about what actually changes the current state of affairs. So those are some of your top stories this week. I'm going to leave you with a little bit of fun. A report in the Wall Street Journal that caught my attention on the spring fashion lines that the high fashion houses are releasing. Remember, spring lines were done months ago when most of the world was in lockdown, and the Wall Street Journal found a very interesting common thread, if you will, no pun intended, that many of these vastly different famous designers turned to the same place for inspiration in their lines, turning to nature and reflecting that in fashion. So if you see a lot of blues and greens this season, that's one of the reasons why. Fashion designer Michael Kors says this: nature provides balance and fashion is all about confidence and comfort. And we could all use a little more. Thank you, Michael. More on all of these stories on our website, From High Fashion to the Suez Canal. We have you covered. What stories would you like to hear more about this week? I always like hearing from you. Questions and comments, let me know. And as always, more on smarternews.com. Have a great week.